Hello, today we're doing a presentation on masculinity in the contemporary workplace. We'll be discussing the gender pay gap between men and women, the differences between men and women when it comes to occupational choices, the potential reasons for the imbalance of men occupying higher status jobs than women. These 3 points will be applied to own contemporary work experiences with further analysis. We will conclude the presentation by evaluating the relevance of the theories applied to our examples with discussion about limitations of these theories. So, first of all, we're going to be talking about what actually is the gender pay gap. So, under the Equal Pay Act, it's actually illegal to pay men and women different wages for the same job. However, across the UK, men earn on average 18.4% more than women. When you just take into account full-time workers, which would exclude part-time workers, which more women work than men, this pay gap drops to 9.1%. When you're looking at part-time workers only, women actually get paid 5.1% more per hour than men. However, you can see the biggest imbalance in the gender pay is at the age of 40, men earn an average of 27% more than women. And we'll be looking at the different reasons as to why there is an imbalance when you cannot be paid differently for the same job.
ACCA 2006 states that even with wage equality agreements, the pay gap between genders still increased within the same jobs, due to the fact that pay increases went primarily to men, as these men were more visible to male managers. Thus, the pay gap issue is not so much an issue of difference in pay for the same job, which is illegal in the UK, but a difference in earnings due to several factors, including primarily hours worked and job choice. For example, at Keele, many of the administrative staff positions are held by women. These positions are deemed to be lower status positions and functions, and thus deserving of lower pay. In addition, these roles may be part-time roles. Compare this to the top roles in the university, such as Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor, where both roles are deemed to be high-status positions to be filled with highly competent individuals. Both roles are occupied by men. This shows that many of the most prestigious, thus high-paying jobs are done by men, because they're seen as more competent, and the support roles, which receive lower pay, are held by women, sustaining gender inequality on campus. The employment wage gap issue needs to be dealt with if we want to see less women end up in poverty as pensioners, as well as improve the lives of individuals and families. Additionally, ACCA 2006 notes that gender of employees affects assumptions about skill, and that even with wage equality legislation, the pay gap between genders still increased within job categories due to the fact that male employees were more visible to male managers, making it a self-fulfilling prophecy. Thus, masculinity in contemporary work is beneficial in that it increases likelihood of being hired, assumptions of high skill, and facilitates higher pay. ACCA 2006 also states that a lawsuit on behalf of 1.3 million female Walmart employees is bringing awareness to the issue of pay inequality. Men and women tend to choose different jobs, which is one major contribution to the gender pay gap. Men may choose to do different types of jobs than women based on what the jobs pay, showing that men in general are more concerned about the wage that they earn. This is not limited to low-paying jobs, but also affects high-status roles. For example, if wanting to go into the medical field, men may choose to be doctors, whereas women may choose to be nurses.
So, a further potential cause for the gender pay gap is working hours done by men and women. Men are more likely than women to work full-time hours, and the average man works 8.4 hours a day compared to 7.8 hours for a full-time woman. There's also a massive difference in the home life work that women do compared to men. Men only do an average of 16 hours a week compared to women who do 26. This includes chores such as cleaning, cooking, taking kids to and from school, all the domestic work. This imbalance between men and women in terms of the work-home theory, as stated by Clark, could be a potential for the difference in pay due to women having less energy and less time commitments to work, so they struggle to advance. Because men are pushing in more hours than women, they're more likely to get promoted potentially due to the fact that the manager deems them more worthy. Another reason potentially explaining the pay gap in the UK is personality difference between men and women. Research done by Smitter et al. Has found that women score higher in neuroticism and agreeableness, which is 2 out of the 5 big traits in personality assessment and psychology. By scoring higher in neuroticism, women are more likely to show emotions and have negative emotions. And by scoring higher in agreeableness, they're more empathetic and therefore more likely to sympathise with a manager or a customer. Men, on the other hand, score higher on aggressiveness, as found by another study, which means they are more likely to ask for a pay rise, as found by Barron. In fact, they're more likely to ask for a pay rise, and a bigger one than women, due to increased aggressiveness, and women being more agreeable means they're sympathising with the manager. When the manager says no, the woman isn't as likely to go back for a pay rise, but due to the man's aggression, he's more likely to ask for a higher pay rise than the woman, ultimately resulting in bigger pay rises and more frequent pay rises. I've also seen some examples of gender gap at work, potentially caused by different working hours by men and women. I worked at a restaurant and there was about 5 men and 15 women members of staff, whereas all the men were full-time at the job. Most of the women were not full-time. So on average, men would get paid a higher wage due to being at the restaurant for longer, having more responsibility, and having worked there for longer as well than the women. This would cause a pay gap, even though they're doing different jobs. It does contribute to the gender pay gap.
I was paid above the minimum wage working in a distribution centre warehouse for a national supermarket chain. In comparison, shop floor workers who tended to be female were paid minimum wage. However, the nature of the work is certainly very different. It's more akin to manual labour than working in customer service or even stacking shelves, so there's more potential for danger. Another thing to consider is, would men work in warehouses if they could get the same pay for an easier job? Also, there are certainly females working in the warehouse, as well as many males working on the shop floor. So it is not an accurate representation of masculinity providing advantages in the workplace.
Hi, I'm Nick. In this section, we'll be discussing the male and female job choices. Nixon explains that manual labour is a key source of identity, pride, self-esteem and power for the working class man, and that they celebrate their masculine sexuality and their physical culture. Nixon also mentions that it seems unlikely that unemployed working class men will seek to enter gender atypical employment such as nurses, primary teachers and shop assistants, which are very customer orientated. Men would rather seek jobs such as distribution services, manual labour jobs and security. This is because they can offer masculine rewards mentioned earlier. In this study, the working class men rejected female-dominated occupations that involve high amounts of emotional labour because they struggled to manage their emotions and be passive with the service encounter. Furthermore, such work denied them the opportunity to relieve stress in their usual ways, which could be through shouting, swearing, and joking around. Because of this, the men remained firmly orientated towards low-skill manual occupations. In my experience working on a farm as a farmhand, all the employees that worked there were male. They were either students or uneducated working class men. The work that was done was either operating farm machinery, for example, grain dryers, JCB diggers or tractors, or as a manual labour worker, which was physically demanding. I feel like the main reason why all the workers were male is partially down to the physical demands of the job and the interest that the job had to offer, which was the agricultural knowledge. Although the area is rural, there are many other jobs that men could find work in, for instance at shops, restaurants and pubs. However, I feel like the nature of the job and the physical side of it attracted these employers to seek employment here. I feel that many of employees choose to do this job because of what Nixon said earlier about seeking gender-typical employment. The employees would rather do manual work and work with machinery, which could be seen as more of a masculine job, rather than on a shop floor in the high street or as a waiter, which can involve emotional labour.
I, on the other hand, have previously worked at Boots store as a customer assistant. The culture within Boots is very much a feminine-orientated environment, where the attributes needed to work there are constructed through the perceptions and beliefs of society that are imposed onto people. All employees are female, besides higher management such as area managers, who are male, which could arguably demonstrate how men are thought higher of in society and are given more important roles, which supports the idea of women working in lower status occupations. In this specific role, it is important to have knowledge in beauty products such as makeup, hair and fragrance, and during the Christmas period it became apparent that this was a role suited to females who had the certain knowledge required, as it was always men coming into store asking for help. Roles such as these are gender defined. You may get the exceptional few women who are engineers and fall into that 6% bracket, but generally speaking, women will gravitate towards gender-suited roles. Individuals choose jobs for vast reasons, but one may be due to the amount of emotional labour that is involved in a role. As previously mentioned by Nixon's theory, men will gravitate towards jobs where they can demonstrate their masculinity within the working environment to achieve a sense of pride, as this was shown by Nick's example of a farm labourer, and sway away from jobs that involve emotional labour, as this is recognised as women's work by Nixon and Kaczynski. Ultimately, they will be less keen to enter a workplace that is dominantly female because this could lower their status both in the working environment and in society as a whole. Alternatively, men can also gain a sense of pride through high-status jobs, such as managers, a role that contains more authority and is greater on the hierarchical ladder. As found in most jobs, such as my role at Boots, men will happily play a role that includes power, as this also shows dominance.
Strobe, Brett and Riley found through their research that female managers fell behind males in terms of salary progression and job transfers. However, gender was not the largest factor at play. Work experience, the type of industry, and human capital were all far more important in determining the rate of progression. So this masculinity had some effect on the rate of progression of managers, however, it's not the sole factor, and in fact was not in the top 3 factors that determine progress.
In my section, I'll be talking about the status of work between men and women. Women are often overlooked for high-status jobs such as managers, as men find it easier to rise to the top. The number of female CEOs of the Fortune 500 has increased by more than 50%. This is from 21 to 32. Although this has increased a lot, this is only a small margin of the top 500. Women are also more likely to be trapped in low-paying jobs for longer periods of time. In the most lucrative professions, women make up less than 30% in each role. Orthopedic surgeon, for example, was the highest paying job overall and has nearly 13 men to every woman in the field. Women only have high status jobs when the subordinates are women, such as teachers and nurses. From my experience, this supports this theory, as a majority of my secondary school teachers were women and was run by a female head teacher. However, when I did my work experience at Carillion PLC in an environment which there was more gender parity, the high-status jobs such as managers were significantly male-dominated. As a result, this suggests that men do get higher status jobs than women. So why are men in higher status jobs than women? People in higher status work conditions are exposed to higher level of particular chronic stress. Therefore, women are less inclined to take on high status jobs due to risk this may have on their work-life conflict. Men also possess high amounts of expert power, whereas women possess more legitimate power. Men have an advantage over women due to this expert power. This is because it is based on not actual competence but perceived competence. Therefore, people may assume that women have generally lower levels of competence when this may not even be the case. As a result, men are seen as better contenders for a higher position. In conclusion, it is clear that a majority of these theories explain why there is an imbalance in favour of men in the workplace. Men tend to be paid more than women. However, this is due to women generally selecting feminine jobs, which are perceived to be lower importance and deserving of lower pay. In addition, the data shows women tend to work part-time to spend more time doing housework and childcare. Although in certain cases, male employees receive higher pay than women, there are specific circumstances where this may be appropriate, for example in the case of the warehouse workers. However, it is important to note that masculinity provides an advantage in terms of being perceived more competent, which can be a reason that men are more likely to receive pay rises and work in higher prestigious jobs. Furthermore, men are perceived to possess more expert power than women, therefore they are considered to be more competent even if that is not the case. This results in women being overlooked for promotions, pay rises, and during the hiring process, furthering inequality between genders.
My experience working in a restaurant highlighted different gender expectations due to the fact that the men often worked in the back of the house, in the kitchen as the chefs and the pot washers, and then the women often worked in the front of the house, so dealing with customers. This highlights expectations as the women were, well, traditionally women are seen to be more caring and sympathetic, so more likely to do high emotional labour jobs, and in the restaurant that is the waitresses and hostesses. Whereas the men worked in a more aggressive, high pressure scenario, traditionally more masculine work and sort of more physical role in the kitchen. And also most of the managers were men. So again, this gender expectation of men being leaders and women being sympathetic, emotional labourers was very much at play in the restaurant that I worked at.
Relating to the theory of Feynman and his work regarding emotional management, I found from my personal experience during my time at Boots that I had to undertake several steps in the process of altering my behaviour to match the feminine or so-called feminine characteristics to adhere to the social constructs that go hand in hand with the job. This shows an intertwining nature with Hillman's work on the stereotyped female characteristics that were required of me to assist with sales. I had to fit in with my team of colleagues, which were completely female apart from the manager. And finally, I had to fit into the perceived image of someone working in the beauty sector of retail. Whilst working at Boots, I was talking to a colleague about the higher roles in management within the company. However, due to the authoritative traits that the current management maintained, my colleague felt she did not have the skill set to carry out the higher ranking job that requires more authority, and I felt like this might have been to do with the male figure we had working higher than us. Instead, as a woman, she felt more comfortable carrying out the role of helping and assisting customers.
Question 3. Do you think gendered occupational segregation is justifiable? Occupational segregation is inefficiently economical and prevents skilled and competent individuals from being able to enter the occupations where they could outperform those already in this occupation. On top of this, it causes dissatisfaction in these individuals, and this combination leads to the pay gap being a persistent problem for policymakers. Due to this, it could be argued that occupational segregation is not justifiable. On the other hand, jobs such as midwifery, you could argue that gender occupational segregation is justifiable, as some women may feel more comfortable being tended by a woman than a man. However, perfectly competent men may be dissuaded from this occupation due to the stigma behind this.